princess played the bass and they sounded sharp. The boss played the brass, the chump made the top. The flute is the duke of soul. He can play the leads on the string. The chump rocking on the blackfish. He sings his belt and his run. They know where it's at. They know that blowfish blow.
Anybody guess what we're celebrating today? We have unicorns, mermaids, and fairies, so we must be doing mystical creatures. That's what we're celebrating today. So just like all of our other Tuesday programs, we're going to start with a story, and then we will show you the different parts of the take and make for today. And then we'll talk at the end a little bit about how to pick up take and makes, because there are a couple left. So the story today, fairy stories quite often come from Ireland. Because the Irish people are very close with the wee folk, so they have a lot of great stories. So we're going to take a story from them. So a long, long time ago, in the country of Ireland, there was a little girl named Nora, and she lived in a cottage deep in the forest. And this forest was a very popular place for the fairies to gather. The fairies from the meadow, and the fairies from the water, and the fairies from the forest would all come together, and they would dance all night. Now, Nora grew up with stories of the fairies. Her mom would tell her stories, her grandmother would tell her stories, and she believed in the fairies, but she had never met a fairy. And that's because fairies only come to you if two things are in place. One is that you believe, and two is if you need them. And up to this point, the fairies hadn't felt that Nora needed them. So, she had not seen a fairy yet. But she was also a very gloomery little girl. And if you don't know what it means to be gloomery, it means that she's really sad all the time. Even when happy things are going on, she's kind of sad. And her family had never seen her smile. So one day the fairies decided that they were kind of sad that Nora was never happy, and they wanted to change that. So Nora one day went for a walk, and she went to her favorite place in the woods. And it was a nice open clearing that had 6 great big birch trees around it. And she settled down into her favorite birch tree, and she was listening to the robins sing, and she had the sun on her face, and just as her eyes were starting to droop, she heard a sound. She heard a knock. It didn't sound like the woodpecker's knock, so she jumped up and she listened again, and she heard it again. But it sounded like it was coming from inside the tree. So she put her ear up against the tree, and she heard, "Nora, turn the key and open the door." And she jumped back. How could this be? She'd been to this tree a million times, and she'd never seen a key. So she put her ear next to it again, and she hears again, "Nora, turn the key and open the door." So Nora looks down, and sure enough, right at her heart level, there was a little tiny key. And she turned it, and a door opened in the tree, and a fairy came out. And she was all dressed in green, and she had beautiful gold glittery wings. And she said, "Nora, we have decided that you need to walk with us in fairyland." And Nora was excited, but she looked at herself and she went, "I'm too big." And the fairy said, "Don't worry about that." And she gives a little whistle, and at the bottom of the tree comes a little gnome carrying a tray. And on the tray there's a little tiny seed. So tiny it's like the speck of dust you get in your eye. And Nora picked up the seed, and she ate it, and poof, she was the same size as the fairy, and standing in the door of the tree. So she walks in and follows the fairy, and they go down circular stairs, and it goes down and down and down and down the trunk of the tree. And there's lights coming in from windows in the tree that Nora had never seen before. And they kept walking until they got all the way down to the roots of the tree. And then they saw a corridor, and they started walking down the corridor, and Nora could see all the fairy workers taking care of the plants. They were taking care of them from the root side, and they were gathering up dew so that they could put them on the flower petals in the morning. And then they came to a body of water, and Nora thought, "This looks like the pond that's by my house." But something's different because she could look up and see the water, and she could look down and see the water. She was in the middle of the pond. But how were they going to get across it? And our little fairy, she blew her little whistle again, and poof, there was a boat. Nora climbed in, and the fairy grabbed onto the back and used her wings to flutter them through the pond. But still, Nora never got wet. It was the most amazing thing she'd ever seen. Now, as they get to the shore, Nora sees a big, beautiful palace. And she finds out that, and so they get to the palace, and Nora sees that the floors are made of gold, and the walls are made of silver, and there are beautiful tapestries or pictures. All the colors of the rainbows hung everywhere. It was so beautiful. And then they came into the grand ballroom, and Nora saw the Queen of the Fairies, and she was the most beautiful thing Nora had ever seen. She had long, beautiful curly hair, and she had a blue dress that looked just like a waterfall, and she had silver wings that looked just like moonlight on the water. And she was celebrating her birthday, the Queen's birthday. And the Queen on her birthday likes to honor the fairies who do good in the land. And so there was a line of workers in front of her, and each time they would step up, a herald would blow his horn, do-do-do-do, and then he would tell the Queen what this fairy had done. And one got an award because they had kept the wheat fields watered. And another one got an award because they kept the roads safe for travelers. And yet another one got an award for keeping the lilies safe from the frost. Now finally, it was Nora's turn, and she stepped up to the beautiful Queen, and the Queen tilted up Nora's chin and looked deep into her eyes, and she was looking deep, deep, deep for that spark of happiness that she knew was in Nora somewhere. And then the Fairy Queen smiled, and she leaned over and she kissed Nora on each cheek. And then, poof, Nora was back in her clearing next to her tree. But she was so excited, and she ran home and she told her mother and her grandmother all about the story and being in fairyland. And her mother said, "Oh, Nora, I think you fell asleep and you were dreaming." But her grandmother looked at her and she said, "Oh no, our dear Nora did have an interaction with the fairies. Just look at that beautiful smile and those two little dimples." So when our Fairy Queen had kissed Nora on the cheek, she'd given her two dimples, and that had brought out her smile. And from that time on, Nora smiled all the time, and anybody who saw her beautiful, sweet smile and her cute little dimples, they smiled back too. It became a very joyous place. So that is the story of Nora and the Fairy Queen. So now we are going to move over to Miss Suzanne, who is going to show us our first script.
Hi everybody. Okay, so today we are going to make a dragon's egg. Okay? In your kit, you're going to get a lump of clay, a little container of rocks, a little container of some sparkly gems, and a piece of tin foil. I know, the foil, you're like, why is Miss Suzanne giving us foil? But you'll see. Okay, so the first thing you're going to do is you're going to take your piece of foil. We're going to let that run away. You're going to take your piece of foil and you're going to crumple it up, okay? Now I have these eggs, so you can see an example of what an egg might look. And like, these are just like eggs from that you might fill at Easter time for egg hunts. So if you have those laying around, it might be helpful for you to have one for kind of like a mold for your foil. But basically, you're going to crumple your foil up until it's like an egg shape, okay? So here's what I already did. And then you're going to take your lump of clay, and I'm going to use the paper plate because it just made it a little bit less messy on my tabletop. And I press my clay out, and I try to just push it out, make it thin. Because what you're going to do is you're going to actually wrap your piece of tin foil in the clay. So that way you're not using quite as much clay as you would if we had to make a solid egg out of just clay. So I take my egg, and I'm going to kind of take the clay and push it around the egg. And make sure all the foil is all covered, because So I just keep squishing it. Okay, my clay is all, or my foil is all covered. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of smooth out the clay. Just kind of make sure it's not, doesn't have too many big bumps or anything. That looks pretty good. Okay? So the other thing about, and I'm going to set this aside, and the other thing that's nice about the paper plate is you can dump out your gems or whatever you want to use, whether you want to use the rocks or the gems, or if you want to use something completely different, that's fine too. If you want to dump them out on the plate, it actually makes it easier to kind of squish those into the clay. So I'm just going to kind of roll them on into the gems, then I'm going to push them in. I'm going to roll some more and push them in. Basically, you want to make sure your egg gets completely covered, or as covered as you want, with the gems. Now, the one thing about this egg is it does have to dry for at least 24 hours until it's ready to be, I don't know, looked at harder. Or I wouldn't say played with, because you're not going to want to really play with this egg. It's not the type of egg to play with. It's kind of to look at. Press those all in. Now, if you want to have your clay colored, what I did with this one is before I smooshed it out, I took a little bit of purple food coloring and put it in the middle of the clay, and then just kind of kneaded the clay and made the color go all throughout the clay. The other thing you can do is after this dries, so once you have your egg, your clay all covered in as many gems as you want, and then after it's dried for 24 hours, then you can take paint and you can paint it. Or it might be kind of fun if you had like glitter paint and you can make it sparkly. You could paint the whole egg in glitter paint. And then there, that's what you have. You have your dragon's egg. Thanks, guys.
Now on to Miss Rosalie, who will do our snack craft for today.
Good afternoon. So today we are going to make a dragon out of a pear. So the first thing I did was I washed my pear, and then you're going to need a grown-up's help because you need to cut your pear in half. Okay? So I've got mine here on a cutting board. Alright, so now we've got our pear ready. Okay, so I'm going to take a marshmallow out of my bag. I'm going to just pull it apart so it's in two pieces and put it up near the top. These are going to be where the dragon's eyes go. The eyes will be the chocolate chips. And you might need to kind of squish them onto the marshmallow a little bit so that they'll stick on really good. Next, I've got some raisins, and I'm going to again, squish them on really good to make the nostrils for the dragon's nose. And last, we need the dragon to be blowing some fire. So you have a piece of red licorice. And that's our pear dragon. So then you can go ahead and eat it up. Have fun.
All right, everyone, our last activity today is a felt sock puppet, and you don't want to know how much trouble Miss Kimberly had coming around to this idea. But this is my dragon that I made, and the key I found is craft bond glue. Okay, Elmer's didn't work for me, fabric glue didn't work for me, hot glue would probably work if you wanted to do that, but we have put into your kit a little container that's got some of this in there, so I would start with that. The other things that you'll get is your little sock puppet form, and then you're going to get a bunch of different pieces. There's some round, there's some teardrops, there's some smaller ones. You'll also get some googly eyes, okay? And all we're really going to do is glue the stuff on. But you kind of have to think about what you want it to look like so that you can decide the right order to do things in. Because you can see my dragon here has a little piece that sticks up. So the first thing I did was I glued down an edge of it, and I folded it over like this, and then I stuck something heavy on it so that it would stay down. And I let that stay there until it was completely dry. So if there's something like that that you want to do, I would do that first. But think about where you want it to go in terms of where you want the eyes and the hair and that sort of thing. So one of the first things that I do is put it on and figure out where I want to put the eyes. So based on where my hand fits with it, I'm going to figure out where it makes sense to put the eyes. Okay, the other thing that I'm going to do is the tongue. So I have two different tongues here. One was kind of my dragon tongue, and then this one's a little more of a regular tongue. So I'm going to attempt a unicorn. Now I started it a little bit earlier so that this part could dry a little bit. So you can see I've got my horn kind of sticking up here, and you can see that his mane is coming down, okay? So I've let that dry. It's still not completely dry, so hopefully I won't tip anything over. And I made two little marks for where I want the eyes to go. Now I made my eyes kind of fancy because I put them onto one of my felt pieces. So I already put that on there, so that would be dry. But I'm going to take my glue, and you do need a fair bit of glue. And I'm going to stick it on right there where I had put little marks for my eyes. I'm going to put him on there too. Alright. And I forgot I was going to do the tongue first, but that's okay. So I'm going to do just a regular tongue for my unicorn because most unicorns don't have forked tongues. So put the glue on there, and I'm just going to open the mouth and stick it right in there. Okay? So you're just going to glue it right in there. And kind of like Miss Suzanne said, you have to let it dry before you can play with it, okay? So make sure it's all completely dry. Now I'm going to show you what I did with the hair. I tied it in a knot right here at the top because then that gives me something to glue, okay? So that's what I did with my mane as well, but I'm going to use this as the tail. So I'm going to put a little bit of glue right here on the end, and I'm going to stick that knot right in there. Okay, and then I'm going to have to let that dry. That one takes a little bit. Now I also want to decorate my puppet. Now I've decided, since I kind of, it's a little hard to see here, but I have a lot of kind of glue and goop right there. So I'm going to cover that up by making a little bow. Okay, so I'm going to take, these two little guys will be my end, and then this will go in the middle. So I'm going to glue that over my hair, or my mane, I guess. Put that on there real quick. And then I would probably let that dry before I put the middle in there, but just so you can kind of see, I'm going to put the middle on there. So this one might take a couple of steps. Now the other thing is most horses have nostrils, just like our dragon does. So I'm going to take my little tiny dots and I'm going to put them right there on the end. Right. Oops, I did not get that one on there very good. Lots of glue. And then I'm going to decorate it. I'm going to make my unicorn polka dotted. So I'm just going to put some glue on these polka dots. Down the back. All right, and again, you're going to want to give all of this time to dry because you can kind of see I have a lot of glue going on there, but you can kind of see that's my unicorn. The other thing I forgot to mention when I did the unicorn, I have a little bit of a pipe cleaner here that's kind of holding that up and gives me something to glue it down to. You can see this one's been done for a few days and he's pretty solidly made. He still pokes out every once in a while, but he's all ready to play with. All right, guys, that's what we've got for you today. Just so you know what's coming up the rest of the week. Tomorrow, our pre-recorded performers are nature's educators. They do wildlife education and wildlife demonstrations. And so they have recorded 3 videos. I'll post those at 1 o'clock and you'll be able to see, to watch those. And then On Thursday, we're going to do a bubble party. Sadly, we can't do it here at the library, but we're going to blast some bubbles at you, and then we're also going to show you some fun ways to make some new kinds of bubble wands. So that's what we've got planned. We do still have take and makes available for today and for Thursday. If you would like them, you can call me at 720-425-9319 and schedule a pickup for today or Thursday afternoon. All right, that's what we've got for you guys. We're going to take it out with a little more of Under the Sea.